Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to another PS5 Jailbreak update. This is going to be a pretty big one. Pretty much every topic here is a massive update that we've had for the PS5. So things are really kicking off right now. I guess I was right in my last video when I said it was the calm before the storm, because the storm is officially here. So first of all, from kstuff, we do in fact have 7.xx kstuff support. So that means if you're on a firmware from 7.0 up to 7.61, you can now jailbreak your PS5 using kstuff to allow you to run your PS4 fake packages as well as your PS5 game dumps, especially once ETA Hen gets fully integrated with this version of kstuff. We'll all be up and running and ready to go here. So now if you are trying to load this, of course, on any of those firmwares above 5.50, you'll need to use either the Blu-ray exploit or the Lua exploit. So I do in fact have a 7.61 system. I'm going to use the Lua exploit because it's just generally faster than the Blu-ray exploit once you have it set up. So essentially, as you can see here, we're on 7.61 firmware. What I'm going to do is load up the game for the Lua exploit, and then I'm going to inject the UMTX exploit itself. That's the first thing. Even if you're on the Blu-ray exploit, the first step is to load the UMTX kernel exploit. Once that has completed, you can then load the ELF loader next and wait for that to run to completion and spawn the ELF loader on the PS5 itself. So wait for all of the notifications to disappear. And then once you've got those notifications, you're then able to send the kstuff payload itself, which I just use netcat GUI on my computer by entering the PS5's IP address in there, port number 9021. And then I just copy in the kstuff payload and inject it. And as you can see, we get kstuff running here on my 7.61 console. So from there, we can go ahead and close out of the game or the Blu-ray disc, and you should be all good to go with kstuff running. Just to test to make sure this works, I do have a couple of test packages on the root of a USB drive that's connected to the PS5. Of course, my usual ones, which are Minecraft and PT, just to see if these install and run. So I can install them using the debug settings package installer to get them installed onto the PS5. Okay, so once the games are installed, we can give them a try. Let's try and launch Minecraft here on my 7.61 console. And as you can see, it does successfully load our fake packages. So we do in fact have kstuff properly working now, all the way up to firmware 7.61, bringing all the firmwares from 3.0 all the way to 7.61 pretty much up to the same level of support, which is fantastic. So obviously big thanks to kstuff for making this possible, along with all of the other contributors like Buzzer and Zeko, as well as Slayer's Govi for creating kstuff in the first place. You know, Best Pig, Idol Sauce, Aliziv, and everyone else who contributed to this project. So incredible news there, but that is just the start of it, because we have many other fantastic things to cover here. So the next big thing, in fact, is the kstuff-toggle, which was also released by kstuff. So this gives us the ability to actually disable kstuff itself once you've already loaded a game. So you may have been aware that there is a performance impact that kstuff causes with your games. And, you know, depending on your game, you might not really notice any difference, but with some games, the performance impact is more evident. So that can be things like longer loading times, you know, lower frame rates, stuttering in certain games, audio issues, and various other problems that can happen with certain PS4 and PS5 games when you're running the kstuff payload. So what's been discovered is that you can essentially disable kstuff once the game is loaded. So you need kstuff obviously to load your PS4 fake packages and your PS5 game dumps, but once kstuff has already loaded the game, you can then unload kstuff itself, and the game will continue to run without kstuff running, which will remove a lot of the performance impact that kstuff was causing. So this is another huge development because it can fix a lot of games that were running into stuttering and freezing and that were basically unplayable, can now be made playable by unloading kstuff once the game has already been loaded. So just to give a couple of examples here, one game that is really bad, and this is not the best example here, just to be clear, but it was just a quick one I could download, was Goat Simulator 3. So this particular game, as you can see here, is running without kstuff. So kstuff is not running right now, and it's still pretty laggy and slow. This is not completely fixable by disabling kstuff, but just as an example, you can see the T-posing NPC walking across the screen from the left to the right, and you can literally count every frame as he's hitching along from left to right here. And then what happens when I enable kstuff is you can see that the hitching becomes a lot slower. So it pretty much halves the performance of this game when you have kstuff enabled versus kstuff disabled. There are other games that might have a long black screen before the game actually loads up, that this issue can be mostly resolved by disabling kstuff. as well as other games that might freeze at certain points that can also be fixed by disabling kstuff as well. So there's two versions of this. There's a plugin version from T-Rex777, I believe, and then there's also from EchoStretch, the original payload itself that you can just send with a payload injector. So just to give another example here, when it comes to loading times, I'm using CTR Crash Team Racing, a PS4 fake package that is installed to the internal storage. Now this game has notoriously long loading times, especially on the higher game updates. So what we're going to do is try this with kstuff on and with kstuff off. So when I try and load this game and I just load up a track with kstuff enabled as normal, you can see that it takes quite a while to actually load this track. We're talking about 45 to 48 seconds. I've tested this multiple times just to make sure, and it's always consistently within about 45 to 48 seconds to load this particular track with kstuff enabled. And obviously I'm speeding this up by 3x here, just to get through the loading a lot faster. But yeah, as you can see in this case, it took 48 seconds to actually load the game. And then there's also some stuttering that happens here and there as the camera is kind of panning at the beginning of the race. There's a few stutters here and there. Also, there were some stutters in the actual loading screen itself. So comparing this to disabling kstuff, where we just take the kstuff-toggle elf file, we copy it into a payload injector, and then send the elf file to our PS5. And you'll notice that it comes up with a notification saying kstuff is disabled. At this point, we can then try loading that same track again, exactly as we did before. But as you'll see this time, we don't get any kind of freezing or hitching in the loading. The game just seems to be running a lot smoother. And this time it only takes 25 seconds to load this track. Same exact track as before, but almost half the amount of time it takes to load it when we have kstuff disabled. So a huge difference there in loading times with this game, and obviously big impacts in performance. Some people reporting the difference of a game running at like 30 FPS to almost 60 FPS just by disabling kstuff. So you can get a huge performance boost by disabling kstuff here. Now, one thing to mention though is once you've disabled kstuff and you're loading a game that requires kstuff to run, if you try and close that game with kstuff still disabled, it will just crash your console or switch off your console. So what you need to do is before you go to close the game, make sure you re-enable kstuff again by sending the kstuff-toggle, which will switch it from being disabled to enabled. So once kstuff is running again, you can then close the game and it should close properly and you should be all good. Now, if you want to use the plugin version, it is just a test version at the moment. But if you want to install it, you can just connect to your PS5 through FTP, go into the data folder, the ETA hen folder, and then go into the plugins folder and just copy the .plugin file for the kstuff-toggle into that folder. And then from there, you'll be able to access it from the debug settings, the plugin section, and you'll be able to just enable that plugin in the ETA hen plugins. And whenever you activate a plugin in the ETA hen settings with kstuff, it does take quite a long time for that plugin to actually apply. So you have to wait for the second notification to appear, which can take like 20-30 seconds. So just give it some time and wait for that second notification to pop up. And then once it does say it is activated, you can then load any of your PS4 fake packages and it will use kstuff to load that game. But as soon as it's loaded, the plugin will then disable kstuff automatically so that you get the better performance. And I believe Lightning Mods is working on integrating this feature as part of ETA hen in a future release. So it should just handle all of this automatically for you in the future. If you just want to wait for that, you can. But otherwise, if you want to get better performance right now, you can either use the plugin version or just inject the elf file yourself so that you can toggle it on and off. So anyway, that's going to make a huge difference for running your PS4 and PS5 games using kstuff. So moving on from that, another huge development that's happened as well is the fact that one of the Flow's hackerone bug bounty reports has been disclosed. This was the one from about 3 months ago, which I reported on in early February. So this is the $10,000 bounty. So there is a brief summary here saying that the sys_fsc2h_control kernel function can lead to kernel stack free vulnerability. The vulnerability is caused by a race condition involving multiple threads accessing a local stack buffer. This could potentially result in a privilege escalation. So whenever we get one of these hackerone reports disclosed from the flow, it's usually a big deal because 90% of the PS5 and PS4 jailbreaks have come as a result of one of these disclosures from the flow. So whenever this happens, it's a pretty big deal. This would be something akin to a kernel exploit, like something like UMTX or IPv6, most likely only for PS5. Apparently this syscall does not apply to PlayStation 4. So this will most likely be a PS5 only vulnerability. Also, a lot of the other exploit developers think that this is going to be a pretty difficult bug to try and turn into a working exploit. So there's some debate on whether this actually is exploitable at the moment. And perhaps PlayStation just gave the flow a bounty for this because, you know, it was a vulnerability in the kernel that it's worthwhile patching anyway. So we'll have to wait and see. Maybe the flow will release a POC if he did manage to create a working exploit for this. But anyway, it's still pretty early days. Generally, a proof of concept needs to be created to test the vulnerability on different firmwares to see when it was patched. Now, most likely it will be patched in 10.60 because the flow was asking a while ago for a 10.40 pup, most likely when he was working on this. So it's likely that 10.40 was the firmware that the flow was trying to exploit this vulnerability on. Also, the bounty was awarded on January 16th. And of course, the 10.60 update actually came out on January the 23rd, so just a week later. So it would be likely that 10.60 was the firmware that patched it. But of course, it could be 11.0 or it might not be patched at all. It's possible that this, vulnerability is just not applicable to the PS5 because, of course, it was actually marked as not applicable by the flow at some point when he tried to close the report. Not only that, but we don't actually have any notes in any of the system software updates here saying that they've added any security fixes to the system software. So that is a bit strange, especially since they're still reporting security fixes in the PS4 updates. So yeah, a little bit of a strange one here, but we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, a proof of concept needs to be created to actually test the vulnerability and then test it on different firmwares to see exactly when it was patched, if it has been patched, and if it is actually applicable to try and use this as a way to create an exploit for the PS5. And if it does, it's a kernel exploit that will need to be triggered from a user mode exploit like the Lua exploit at the moment, which is currently the only userland exploit that works on higher firmwares. But anyway, that's the situation here at the moment. We'll have to wait and see how this evolves over time. So moving on from that, the last thing I want to mention here just real quick is that there is an auto backporter created for PS5 games. So you can go ahead and download this here. I'll leave a link to it down in the video description. I believe this is from Marcus95. So generally, this is just using IdleSauce's backporting script, which is designed to change the target SDK version of your PS5 games to target a lower version. So the idea behind this is that you just copy these files to the root of your extracted game, where the eboot.bin file is, and then you just double click the auto backport.bat file, and that should attempt to run this. And what it will do is it will patch any executable files first with the SDK script to change their target SDK version to a lower version. And then it will run the makefself script, which will then fake sign those executables to make them loadable on the PS5 through kstuff and items flow. So that's the basics of what this script does. It might fix some PS5 games where the only issue that's preventing it from working on the older firmwares is the target SDK version. But for most other games that are not working on older firmwares, they will require manual backporting because they have a lot more work that needs to be done to them to get them running on older firmwares. In which case, this script will not work for those games. So it might fix some games, but probably not most of the games that are not working right now. Now, if you're wondering what PS5 game dumps you can actually play on your specific firmware version, EchoStretch does have a list that seems to be being maintained quite frequently that gives you an idea. It shows you, what firmwares the games are working on and what backports are available for them and what firmwares those backports work up to. So all of that information is there. I'll leave a link to this spreadsheet down in the video description so you can figure out exactly what games are playable on your firmware version. So anyway, I think that'll do it here for this update. We have had some major improvements made so far. A lot of the performance issues with games are being resolved. We can now jailbreak up to 7.61. We have a new kernel vulnerability that works on higher firmwares that's been investigated. So yeah, pretty impressive stuff here. So hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, as always, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.